It's Koala the Bear here from Australia. I normally don't do podcasts. In fact, the last time I did one, it was when I still liked the show Homeland, which I don't. So it's been a long time since I've done a podcast. But I'm in double isolation right now and thought, I guess I had a few things to talk about that might make it a bit easier to get through it this time. Um, I know this is basically first world privilege because we have it so much easier than so many other places. And, seeing the sights in Afghanistan, um, that's quite horrific as well. So, all of this low key first world whinging is very much to be taken with a giant pinch of salt and contextualized. Um, I'm not trying to suggest my woe is any more than anybody else's, but I guess I just wanted to talk about how I'm finding things. So the ACT has been really lucky, as has most of Australia, in terms of the impacts of COVID. Even though we are sort of in the middle of New South Wales, which is one of the most populated states in Australia, because we have a relatively small population, it's pretty spread out. We don't have a lot of high rises, and we also have a very compliant population. During the first wave, lockdown was pretty much a dream. Like, it was very easy for us, especially if you could work from home. My mother has bipolar schizoaffective disorder, so at that time I was pretty stressed. But because I was working from home, she stayed with me. I kept her safe. Um, it was pretty easy to minimize risk by shopping locally instead of going to big shopping centres. I would just shop at my local supermarket, which is quite small, and everything was fine. This year, everything is quite different with the Delta variant. So, what happened was um, they announced lockdown here in the ACT after only one case. And a lot of people thought that was probably overkill. But to be honest, I could see why they had done that because we had the experience of New South Wales that they locked down a little bit late, and it meant that things were kind of out of control by the time they were trying to contact trace. And it was pretty lucky that they did do it because they locked down, there was one case, and then within a day there were four cases. I've lost track of what they were up to in lockdown, but I think we jumped to 17, 22. We'll probably have another big number today. What was more alarming was the exposure sites. So last time it was actually pretty easy because there were a very limited number of exposure sites. And, you know, even during lockdown, we could go wandering around. I could walk my dog every day. It was pretty free and easy. This time, we are wearing masks, which is fine. There are certain limitations in relation to where we can go. They want us to stick close to home, which I'm pretty happy to do. The issue is the number of exposure sites is vast. We went from a dozen or so. Now we're well over 200. And I am surrounded on all sides. And for the first few days, I kept looking at the exposure locations and thinking, wow, I dodged that one by a day, by half a day. I went there before, I went there after. Around me, everyone was going into quarantine, um, but I was still okay. So I was doing my best to sort of offer to other people. If they needed help, I could do groceries. I've got a neighbour on our street who was in quarantine, so I was doing groceries for her and dropping off baked goods. I do a sort of nightly medication check on my mum every night, so I give her medication when her support workers go home. Everything was fine until we read the latest exposure site, and my mum's local supermarket that I duck into to buy her groceries. Looking at the times, it looks like they had a COVID positive employee working there. I happened to walk in twice. I walked in pre-lockdown for about 10 minutes, so that would mean no one was wearing a mask. And then one day, 1.5 days after lockdown was announced, I walked in again for another 10 minutes, but this time everyone was masked. So the first time I walked in, that was considered a close contact, and the second time was casual. In any case, ACT health regulations require that I quarantine. That means my husband's got to quarantine as well because he ducked in briefly and also is living with me, and have to take 2 tests. Um, so the testing was a bit of a challenge because we prefer testing by way of the drive-throughs because I think they're safer. But some of the times that we're seeing for the drive-throughs in Canberra, because so many sites have been hit, have been quite intense, like 4 up to 9 hours. I've got the smallest bladder in the world. Plus, I've got to work as well, so that wasn't an option. So we made the call to go to a walkthrough testing clinic, which I know is high risk, but we lined up from 5:30. We were first in the door, and they opened at 8, and we were gone by about 8:20 or so, which isn't too bad in the scheme of things. The only issue is I'm going to have a second COVID test, which I'm not looking forward to. I now see why people panic buy because we're told don't panic buy, the shops stay open throughout lockdown, and that is totally true. And I found it fine last time, and to be honest, until I went into quarantine, it was totally fine as well because you'd go out, you'd do your shop, it wouldn't be too crowded, you'd come back, and everything was fine. But everything changes when you're in quarantine because you literally can't go out. And when most of your friends and family are also in quarantine, they can't help you either. And if you've only got a family of two or like a household of one, like my mum, online shopping really isn't viable. Worse, because half of Canberra, no, not half of Canberra, but at least 12,000 Canberrans are in quarantine right now, the online groceries is really constrained and burdened right now. And people can't get an order delivered until, next week. So I'm not saying panic buying is a good thing, but I guess I can see why at the beginning of an outbreak, people feel like they need to go out and buy more rather than less because, first of all, you don't know how long lockdown will last. And I've got no sympathy really for people who shop because of a lockdown, but it's the quarantine issue that is a challenge, especially in a city like Canberra. We've got a population of around 400 and something plus, 400,000 plus. Um, and we are very spread out, but because we've got a small population, we've got a very small number of shopping centres, schools, gyms that people congregate around compared to many other cities. So if, public transport and all of those cities are affected, it actually affects a really large percentage of the population. And that is what we are seeing in this particular outbreak. Now, for me, most worrying wasn't us because we've got enough groceries. My husband and I are totally fine to stay at home. It's actually quite relaxing. The fact that we can't walk our dogs is a little bit challenging. In fact, I'm a bit stressed about, what would happen if we had a vet emergency. That's a bit stressful, but, we would find a way to manage. The biggest challenge for me is the fact that my mum, so I can't bring her into our house and sort of contaminate her, bring her here and look after her here because that would mean I can't take her to her regular medical appointments and it would be very difficult for her to be taken because she would be contaminated by me. There would be issues. So right now she's being looked after full time in her home by support workers. And so I had to extend the hours that they were coming. And, we did have support workers who freaked out and didn't want to come to Belconnen area, so didn't want to support her. And for the time being, we're okay because we have a lineup that's willing to support her and everything is sort of on an even keel. But the issue is I can't guarantee that more won't freak out and not want to work with her. Also, disability support workers are people. They shop, they go to places like everybody does. It is entirely possible that they will be taken out of action just like I've been taken out of action. We're also finding increasingly that a lot of the places that do home delivery and, for groceries and also restaurants they're also being taken out of action as well. And, they can't afford to put people on shift. So basically, their entire workforce gets taken out if one or two of their employees are in an exposure location. So it's been pretty easy to overburden and constrain the ACT system just because of our small population. A lot of the 12,000 plus people in isolation right now are medical workers, restaurant staff, grocery staff, school people in terms of teachers, families, siblings, and other relatives related to the school children. So that's how it is right now. Like, we've got it way better than a lot of places, but I guess that is why I'm finding this lockdown more stressful than the last one. A huge coping mechanism for me, and it's one that I often debate with myself whether it's unselfishness or selfishness that makes me want to do it. But one of my huge coping mechanisms in all situations has always been to try to help other people. When my brother and neighbours went into quarantine, I had assumed that I would be the one helping them out and making deliveries. It was a huge shock to me when I realised that I was also taken out of action and I wouldn't be able to help anybody. So, yeah, I know I'm going to be fine and I'm just feeling sorry for myself. But I think that's why I'm finding lockdown a lot tougher this second time round. But counting down the days, it is currently Friday the 20th of August. I am due for my second test, around the 24th or the 25th of August. And I'm scheduled to come out of quarantine at midnight on Friday the 27th of August. Assuming that the exposure sites that they continue to list do not indicate that I have visited any in the days before I went into quarantine, I should be fine. So, anyway, those are my thoughts. Not very interesting, but they're mine. For anyone else who is in lockdown, I really hope that you are doing okay and that you're looking after yourself.